Hi, folks. Um, After the election, things seem to be pretty quiet around here in the gloomy Northwest. There weren't too many news reports from moronic right-wingers getting me all agitated, so I took a little time off and didn't make very many videos. But now the struggle begins anew. Um, I titled this one Growth and Stability. After the market crash in 1929, Andrew Mellon, who was the Secretary of the Treasury and one of the richest men in America, advised Herbert Hoover, who was the president at the time, that we should liquidate labor, liquidate stocks, liquidate farmers, liquidate real estate. It will purge the rottenness out of the system. High costs of living and the high living will come down. People will work harder, live a more moral life. Values will be adjusted, and enterprising people will pick up from less competent people. Essentially, he was advising Hoover to do nothing, to let the crash run its course, let the people starve as they will. In the fullness of time, market forces, the invisible hand of the free market, would make everything right. On theoretical grounds, Mr. Mellon was probably right. Sooner or later, the market would have recovered. And on personal grounds, his advice makes a lot of sense. Even though Mellon had lost millions in the crash, he still had millions more to go. Just meant that he'd have to shift over to drinking domestic wine instead of that expensive imported stuff. The economic downturn was only a minor inconvenience as far as he was concerned. However, for the bulk of Americans, families who depended on the weekly paycheck of their father or husband to pay the rent and provide food, now that that husband was unemployed, were facing homelessness and starvation. In the 1920s, there was no unemployment insurance, there were no food stamps, there was no welfare, there was no protection for people out of work at all. You went to your relatives, and if they were out of work as well, then everybody got to starve all together in a big happy family. Yes, Mr. Mellon was probably right. But the truth is that most people, most normal people, do not have the resources to survive while the market goes about at its own sweet, slow pace, repairing itself. That sort of prompted John Maynard Keynes to say, famously, in the long run, we're all dead, which was his dry British way of saying that who really gives a shit what the economic conditions are going to be 10 years from now if I can't survive long enough to enjoy them. The fact is that the oscillations in the economy, the ups and downs that are classically associated with free markets may be just too violent and too long for any society to endure. You just can't, for most people, just cannot go 2 or 3 years without a paycheck. A commentator on one of my videos, The Poor Create Jobs, pointed to the period 1870 to 1886 as the most a period in which the GDP grew at a faster rate than it ever has in U.S. history since. He associates this with a lack of government regulation and extrapolates from that to say that the reason we do not have good economic growth now is because there is too much government regulation. I took a look into the history of the period and found that there were at least two major depressions during that 16-year period. The first, the Long Depression, began in 1873 and went to 1879. And the second one was the Panic of 1893, which at the time was the worst recession the U.S. had faced in its history. When I pointed this out to the commentator, he told me it was all a lie. This is a kind of a classic right-wing response. If the facts don't fit what the right wing wants to believe, well, the right wing just goes ahead and makes up its own facts. I really don't know how they expect us, the majority of Americans, to take their arguments seriously when, they don't believe in science. They rewrite history pretty much at will just to suit themselves. It's like it's like a religion. The right wing is like, yeah, they're religious, and being a Republican is like a religion. I have this belief, and then I just make up facts to support that belief without any regard to what might actually have happened or what the vast majority of scholars or scientists might believe. The accepted economic history of this country is that prior to 1929, there had been a series of depressions, one about every 10 years, each one being more violent, more prolonged than the previous one. These economic disruptions had, by the early 1900s, led to real class warfare. And I do not use that term in the same way that these whiny Republicans use it. They trot the term out every time the rich and successful people in this country are asked to pay their fair share or asked to give back to the society that have nurtured them. They call that class warfare. No, this wasn't that kind of nonsense. This was real class warfare. Police and National Guards firing into crowds of unarmed protesters, bombs being thrown, public officials being assassinated. President Garfield was assassinated in 1891. William McKinley assassinated 10 years later in 1901. The economic growth that took place in the period 1870 to 1886 owes more to the nearly free land that was being handed out after it had been stolen from the Indians. The land was being opened up for economic exploitation by the publicly supported railroad trusts. A large influx of immigrants from Europe provided cheap labor to develop the country with. And in this period, large silver deposits were found in the West, and later large gold deposits in Alaska, which fuel the whole run. Who's to say that if there had been stiffer government regulations of the economic activity of the time, that in fact we would have not had even higher growth rates? The public would have been spared the habitual round of collapses, the runs on the bank, the fraud, the swindling that was rampant in the era. Maybe if the government had had a heavier hand and made everybody play by the same rules, we would have had an even more prosperous 16-year period than we managed to have. It is one of the foundation blocks of a right-wing theology that government regulations slow economic growth. I hope just from the few examples I've provided, you'll see that there's a lot of problems with this claim. But, even if it isn't true, I'm willing to set that all aside for a moment and say, okay, what if government regulations do in fact slow economic growth? Well, if what we bought with this slower economic growth was increased economic stability, that actually might be a decent deal. That actually might be something I'd be willing to pay for. The fact is that most people are just trying to pay the rent, put food on their family's table, and what they want is stability. They want a job to go to. They want prices to remain stable. They want life to go on in its, grindingly boring way. And don't worry about the fast boys, the smart boys, the guys who want to retire, at the age of 25, a millionaire. If they're smart enough and quick enough, they'll figure out a way. And even if because of a slow economy they have to wait to be 35 before they retire, well, boo-hoo. Who cares? Honestly, I think we'd do a lot better to have some stability in this economy and a little less growth. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. See you later.